Welcome back to Star Trek Revisited with me, Peter. In this episode today, I am going to be reviewing a classic Series 1 episode of Star Trek, which is The Menagerie, Part 1 of 2. Now, I will be reviewing only Part 1 in this episode and Part 2 in a separate episode. And without any further ado, shall we just get started? An immediate comment I have when going into this episode is that the shot of the Enterprise orbiting the planet, to me, doesn't look that great. It looks like maybe the remastering budget was drying up a little bit for this particular episode. It's definitely not where the money was spent. It's adequate, but it's nothing special. But anyway, we move down to Starbase 11 on the surface, and this is another point that I want to make, actually. This episode in production order is a little bit samey compared to Court Martial for a number of reasons which will become clear. But the first one is that if you're watching in production order, they have visited Starbase 11 2 episodes in a row, but which may or may not be unusual. But it's something I notice anyway. I think it's the one instance where the broadcast order makes sense over the production order. I do like the surface of Starbase 1. It's daylight here, and there's busy Starfleet people gathering around this courtyard outside of the headquarters buildings. And we see a young female officer called Miss Piper, and she is waiting for a landing party from the Enterprise to arrive. Now, in the background, we can see two Starbase 11 officers conversing, and I am pretty sure that the one in yellow, although I can't get a good look at his face, but I'm pretty sure that is Billy Blackburn, who usually plays Enterprise Officer Lieutenant Hadley. So this isn't surprising at all, because a lot of the background actors would not only play Enterprise background crew members, but background actors from different situations like this, and indeed in alien races as well. So it's definitely something to look out for in that wider context of just people on the Enterprise. As our landing party beams down to Starbase 11, we get our familiar big three. It's a classic Kirk, Spock, and McCoy combination. They are warmly greeted by Miss Piper, who relays that they are most welcome, but the Commodore is puzzled as to why they suddenly changed course and came here, to which Kirk replies, well, we received a subspace message asking us to divert here. And Miss Piper responds, well, this base sent no message, Captain. Now, we cut to the Commodore's office, and it's a different Commodore from Court Martial. It's Starbase 11, the same Starbase, but it's no longer Commodore Stone, it's Commodore Mendez. So the commanding officer of Starbase 11 has changed in a very short space of time. And this Commodore is wearing the more familiar yellow shirt or gold, rather than the red that Commodore Stone was wearing. Now, this character, Commodore Jose Mendez, is played by a fantastic actor called Malachi Throne. And he is one of those actors who's cropped up a lot in Star Trek. The irony of him playing a character in this particular episode is that most of you will know that this two-parter represents a flashback episode. As we get into this, we're going to see flashbacks to the original pilot episode, The Cage. Now, Malachi Throne just so happened to play the voice of the Telosian Keeper in The Cage. The confusion at the Enterprise's presence at Starbase 11 continues, with Kirk insisting that Spock had received a message from the former commanding officer of the Enterprise, Fleet Captain Christopher Pike. And Mendez informs them that that is not possible in any way, shape, or form. And Kirk says, why? And Kirk doesn't know the reason. He doesn't know. And Mendez can't believe this. You actually don't know what's happened to Captain Pike. I'm sorry to have to be the one to show you. And as they exit the Commodore's office, note that a female member of staff stands up to attention as the officers go past her. And you'll note a discrepancy that she is wearing the Enterprise Delta on her uniform as opposed to the Starbase symbol that should be there. So I must admit, in all the times I've watched this episode, that's not something I've ever spotted before. So a really cool spot. But they move through the corridors of the Starbase. They go into a quiet, intensive care area. And Mendez asks Kirk, have you ever met Chris Pike? And Kirk replies, we met when he was promoted to fleet captain. Now, if you watch Strange New Worlds, as I'm sure many of you watching this do, we know that younger Kirk and younger Christopher Pike have in fact met each other a number of times in that show. And it just doesn't fit for me, because this conversation is relayed in such a way that, although he doesn't explicitly say it, it's implied from the tone, to me anyway, that Kirk has only met him once when he took over the Enterprise from him. Now, what I do get from this exchange is a definite continuity error, because Mendez then relays to Kirk and party that Pike is about Kirk's age, which is absolutely not the case. Pike is much older than Kirk, and certainly based on Strange New Worlds and the appearance and age of Anson Mount, who plays him in that series, but also when you see the flashbacks to what will be transpired to be 13 years ago, and Jeffrey Hunter, who at that time looked around about Kirk's age, which would have been in his mid-30s. They arrive at the room where Pike is residing, and in they go. And we see a figure from behind at first who is sat down in a black, what turns out to be a wheelchair. And as they enter, Mendez calls Captain Pike by name, and the wheelchair turns around to reveal a horribly disabled and disfigured Captain Christopher Pike. Now, it turns out that Fleet Captain Pike had been on a training mission on a cadet ship, an old Class J starship, and one of the baffle plates ruptured. He went in to get those kids out who were still alive, and the delta rays caused by the baffle plate explosion caused these injuries. Now, again, if you've seen, actually not Strange New Worlds, in this case, if you've seen season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, in the context of that episode, we get a flash forward to that accident actually happening. And I'll not delve too deeply into how I feel about that and Pike ultimately finding out what would happen to him before it happened, but we'll talk about that at some point in the future. Mendez asks Pike if he would allow these 3 gentlemen, who he knows, by all accounts, to visit with him. Because he says to Pike, you remember these gentlemen, they wanted to visit with you. And 2 beeps emanate from Pike's chair. And Mendez relays to the Enterprise party that 2 flashes mean no. And Mendez tries to persist and says, I thought you might make an exception for them. But no, he's steadfast. The 2 beeps continue. But Spock, who obviously has served with Pike before, for well over 11 years, as he mentions in the build-up to this scene, asks Captain Pike, may I remain for a moment? And Pike responds with a single beep indicating yes, and the others exit the room. Spock then immediately addresses Pike and says, you know why I've come, Captain. It's only 6 days away at maximum warp, and I have it well planned. Pike beeps again twice for no. And Spock goes on and says, I've never disobeyed your orders before, Captain, but this time I must. And Pike keeps on saying no, blinking no. And Spock says, I know it is treachery and it's mutiny, but I must do this. I have no choice. Dramatic music, and the teaser comes to an end. After the titles, we get the name of the episode, The Menagerie Part 1, as the Enterprise orbits Starbase 11. Down on the surface, it is evening time now, and we see this gorgeous purple sky with that ringed moon in the distance. And we cut to a scene in Commodore Mendez's office where he and Kirk are still trying to get to the bottom of this mystery as to why and how the Enterprise was called to this planet. Both officers steadfast in their version of why the Enterprise should or should not be here. And it's established in the conversation, in a rather tense exchange, that a computer expert can change record tapes, make them say anything, say nothing, say whatever they want it to say. And I think Kirk here is understandably being very, very defensive of his first officer, Spock, who is the only person on the Enterprise who has any apparent awareness of this message. He was the one who received it and relayed it and ultimately diverted the Enterprise there, which is something that is bothering Mendez, clearly. He calls down to the computer center where a guy called Chief Humboldt relays to Commodore Mendez that they've checked and rechecked everything. The space could not possibly have sent that message. We've checked everything possible. So Mendez says, start checking the impossible, and ends the transmission. Up gets Humboldt, and he walks around his computer center, and at the doorway, very, very carefully and sneakily, in walks Spock, who goes around behind some pieces of equipment and creeps up behind a crewman in the computer center and renders him unconscious with a Vulcan nerve pinch. He then goes over to a particular computer area, and he opens it up, and he starts playing around with the settings. We then cut back to the Commodore's office, where a bit of a strange scene for me, in that Miss Piper walks in, and Mendez says, "Have I introduced Miss Piper? This is Captain Kirk, Miss Piper." And well, they've already met. They met in the courtyard earlier on. So, and clearly a bit of time has passed by now. So it seems a bit weird that he's only introducing Miss Piper now. Now, there's a little bit of flirtation goes on between Kirk and Piper here. They clearly have a bit of an eye for each other. And she relays that, "I recognize the captain immediately. You were described by a mutual friend, Lieutenant Helen Johansson," to which Kirk rather boyishly and cheekily says, "Helen described me," and she replies back with a big smile on her face, "She merely mentioned that she knew you, sir." And it's a little bit of a flirtatious exchange. Now, one thing I noticed about this is that this lady was, it's possible that one man might know more than one Helen in the galaxy, but what would have been a really nice touch here, if it hadn't been just a random name, Lieutenant Helen Johansson, it would have been really good if it had actually been Dr. Helen Noel, who we never see again on the Enterprise, so she could easily have been transferred somewhere away and be friends with Miss Piper. So I always think that when this exchange happens. Interesting. What I do also love as well is that Mendez does not fail to notice the little bit of sexual chemistry that there is between Piper and Kirk. I mean, he's got this sort of knowing thought, which you can clearly almost read his mind, like, oh, here we go, Kirk again, Mr. Lothario. Kirk obviously has a reputation for being a bit of a ladies' man, but it's an interesting exchange. As we cut back to the computer center, Spock is tuning the piece of equipment he's working on to generate a fake audio message, and he gets it to read out, "Starbase operations to Enterprise, stand by to receive new orders." And we cut to the Enterprise. We're on the bridge, and on the bridge we have got Mr. Hansen at the helm. We've got a unrecognized technician wearing blue jumpsuit in between. Helm and navigation doing something. I don't recognize the guy at navigation. Uhura is at communications. And we've got a guy standing next to her, and I can't quite see who is at the engineering station. It may be Leslie, but I'm not sure. But Uhura gets this message, "Starbase operations, Mr. Hansen," and the message comes on the intercom saying, "We are to receive new orders directly into the ship's computers." And Hansen goes over to the science station to receive these new orders into the library computer. And he says, "Enterprise standing by." He then, quite rightly, asks Uhura to request confirmation, which she does. Enterprise Starbase, request confirmation. Meanwhile, back on the Starbase, Chief Humboldt has returned from wherever he went, and he sees Spock and challenges him, says, "This is a security area." Spock says, "I have security clearance." And a little bit of a scuffle ensues, and Humboldt tries to stop Spock doing whatever he's doing, and Spock ultimately renders him unconscious with the nerve pinch. And all this time, Uhura is calling down to the Starbase, trying to get a response from what they are trying to verify is a trustworthy signal. Spock puts a tape into the computer banks as Uhura is saying, "We need operating confirmation from the ship's captain." Just in time, Spock presses play on the tape, and the message says, "This is Captain Kirk. You have confirmation, Miss Uhura." Hansen chips in, "How can I handle the helm if I don't know where we're going?" Because the orders have been programmed directly into the ship's computers. Really beautifully, cleverly here, Spock's next taped message in Kirk's voice is, "Mr. Spock is with me here. He'll answer all questions. Kirk out." And Spock goes and speaks freely and talks to Hansen. Now, Authorized, seemingly, the ship's computers will handle the helm on this voyage, Mr. Hansen. You will not discuss this with the crew or Starbase personnel. Are you clear on that? Very clear, says Hansen. Okay, stand by. We'll warp out of orbit in 1 hour. And Spock climbs up this ladder and off he goes. Now, one thing that does interest me or bother me here is we've got two unconscious computer center operatives here. How long does it take for those guys to be found? As we cut back to Kirk watching the monitor of Pike in his quarters, just sat there, and he's continuing to blink no. In walks Dr. McCoy, and they discuss what on earth Pike could be trying to tell them, and McCoy frustratingly goes on to say that this man can think any thought that you or I can. His mind is as active as ours, but he can't reach out and nobody can reach in, and it could take us weeks, months, and more maybe to ask the right question and get the right 1 beep or 2 beep response. So frustrating. One might wonder here, though, why it wasn't suggested that Spock tried the Vulcan mind meld. That's an interesting thought, but something that has clearly been glossed over. Now, during this exchange between Kirk and McCoy, Kirk comes to the upsetting conclusion for him that could it be Spock behind all this? Could it have something to do with his first officer? McCoy defends Spock and says, forgetting how well we both know Spock, the fact he's a Vulcan makes it impossible for him to tell a lie. Kirk says, well, he is half human. McCoy says that half is completely submerged. As they're conversing, a message comes in from the Enterprise. Dr. McCoy, needed in transporter room, or seemingly from the Starbase rather, not the Enterprise. McCoy answers, slightly irritated. What's going on? Medical emergency aboard the Enterprise. That's all we've got. You just needed aboard. And McCoy says, oh, it's probably just a hangnail or something. I'll beam up and see what's going on. And we transition to another scene where Kirk is still in the office with Mendez, and we have Miss Piper watching Pike on the monitor. It has been revealed that he's always under observation in some way, shape, or form. So Miss Piper is clearly on this duty at this moment in time. Not quite sure why she's doing it in there and why she's standing. That seems a bit odd, but oh well. And Mendez hands Kirk a file which is labeled Talos 4, top secret for eyes of Starfleet Command only. Mendez says, I'm certifying that I ordered you to read it. Mendez asks Kirk what he knows about Talos 4, and Kirk immediately says, General Order 7. Every ship captain knows. No starship under any circumstances is to visit Talos 4. And Mendez chips in, and to do so is the only death penalty left on our books. Not only Fleet Command knows why, and not even this file gives us that information. But as he opens the file, it does tell us the only Earth ship that ever visited the planet. And we can read this all out. In fact, it says top secret for eyes of Starfleet Command only. Subject Talos 4 in third quadrant of Vernal Galaxy. Known facts, detailed information, cross-referenced with 3XY, Fagran level mass computer. The only Earth ship that ever visited the planet, Talos 4, was USS Enterprise, commanded by Captain Christopher Pike, with half Vulcan science officer Spock. Recommendations, be it hereby noted that said following instructions be incorporated into Starfleet policy. No one will ever visit Talos 4. The following officers have visited Talos 4 and recommended that no human should ever visit it again. Captain Christopher Pike, half Vulcan science officer Spock. Starfleet Command by order of Robert L. Conrad, I think that is signed by commanding officer. Interesting. It's interesting that at the bottom it only names 2 individuals. We've seen The Cage, all of us. Let's take that as read. If you haven't, go and watch it and come back. And interesting that it only lists Pike and Spock, and that they specifically mention half Vulcan science officer Spock. That always jars me a bit. I don't know why they would describe it in that way. Now, as this is mentioned, it captures Miss Piper's attention, and she glances towards Kirk and Mendez. And as she glances back, in the time that she's taken to look away, she notices that Commodore Captain Pike, he's gone. And Mendez goes to answer a communication. Now, I'm presuming that he is answering a hail of some sort, although we don't audibly hear one. At least I've never heard one in this episode. So I think that might be a goof that was left out that they would expect to get. And he says, Mendes here, what's going on? And the reply is, Starship Enterprise, Commodore, she's warping out of orbit, refuses to acknowledge our signal. And Kirk has this look on his face of, well, just indescribable, to be honest. We cut to the Enterprise leaving orbit. On the bridge, we've got Spock in command, Hansen with his arms folded at the helm, Uhura standing at her station. And Hansen says that it seems strange with no navigator on duty, and Spock says the Enterprise knows where she's going, Mr. Hansen. Uhura gets a signal from Starbase, and Spock instructs her to ignore it. Maintain radio silence. And at which point, he signals the whole of the ship as McCoy walks onto the bridge. He states that, per Starfleet command, he's been put in temporary command of the Enterprise. While our destination is secret, our mission is relatively straightforward. Captain Kirk's been allocated medical rest leave until our return to Starbase. He instructs that you follow my orders as you would his. And that's it, first officer out. McCoy immediately questions this. Well, who said anything about Jim needing a medical rest leave? And Spock says to him, I'm sorry they elected to keep certain things from you, Doctor. And they go down off the bridge and into a room where it's revealed Captain Pike is present, still blinking no. And McCoy immediately and appropriately, as a doctor, asks, Captain, are you all right? I see that you're still blinking no. And Spock then plays a tape, which again has Kirk's voice on it, saying, Kirk to Dr. McCoy, recording you this message so there's no confusion. Sorry I couldn't tell you personally and have to make this an order. You're not to disturb Captain Pike, but make sure he's well cared for. Follow Spock's instructions to the letter. So the games continue. Spock then returns to the bridge where Hansen informs them there seems to be an object following them about the size of a star-based shuttlecraft. Again, Spock says, no action, don't reverse course, don't acknowledge the signal, we will take no action. We then get a shot of the Starbase 11 shuttlecraft, which is called Picasso. And this is a thumbs up from me because it's a nice new effect. We don't get a generic shot of a shuttlecraft as we used to in the unremastered effects that were previously in place. On board the shuttle is Kirk and Commodore Mendez, who are trying to signal the Enterprise, but there is no answer. And they're debating, well, Spock's headed for Talos 4, all right. Why would he want to get Pike there? We cut back to the Enterprise, Spock is on the bridge, and this reminds me of that scene in Conscience of the King where Spock was alone on the bridge at night and trying to clandestinely or discreetly quiz the library computer for something. Don't they have a night shift on the bridge on this starship? Why would Spock be alone? But anyway, this is done very discreetly, and he's lock onto object following us and identify it is a Starbase shuttlecraft, as everyone thought and suspected. And he asks how long until oxygen supply runs out on the shuttlecraft before it can return to Starbase. And he's informed, afraid the oxygen supply is now past the point of safe return, to which Spock sits down and pensively realizes that he has a decision to make here, as we cut back to a lovely exterior shot of the shuttlecraft, which is registry SB11-1201-1. And earlier, when Mendez had tried contacting the Enterprise, he had identified them as Starbase Shuttlecraft 1 to Enterprise, so that makes sense. And inside, Mendez reclines in his chair and says, well, we coast. And Kirk curses them for coming along, to which Mendez simply replies, RHIP, rank has its privileges. And 2 hours of oxygen left, which Mendez quips wonderful. We cut back to the Enterprise again, and McCoy's on the bridge. Everyone's back on the bridge now, miraculously, now that Spock doesn't need this private time. And McCoy quips, I keep wondering who's after us in a shuttlecraft, and I keep coming up with the same answer. Is it the captain, Mr. Spock? And Spock's very flippant about it, but he goes to a science station, and he says, computer, lock on to shuttlecraft following us. And then he says, go to tape Able, Baker 7, execute instructions. And Hansen then comments that the ship's engines are reversing. We're coming to a full stop. McCoy looks very, very confused as Spock calls security, send an armed team to the bridge and transporter room, stand by to beam Captain Kirk aboard. Until that point, Lieutenant Hansen is in operational command, and Hansen looks very, very confused as behind him we have, hello, Billy Blackburn in blue overalls, and what I think is Eddie Paskey as Mr. Leslie, although his hair looks a bit flatter than usual. Spock then presents himself to Dr. McCoy for arrest. He says, "A senior officer present, I present myself to you for arrest. The charge is mutiny. I never received orders to take command." And Uhura looks absolutely stunned. McCoy looks even more stunned. And security arrive. And what I like about this is McCoy says to them, Mr. Spock is under arrest. And then he actually consults Spock. It's clear that despite everything, he still trusts Spock and asks him for advice here on his confinement. He says, "Is confinement to quarters enough?" And Spock says, "Adequate, Doctor. I'll make no trouble." And it's just a nice little touch that he asks for Spock's guidance in how we should confine him. And then McCoy says, "Well, confine him." And off they go, and Uhura goes to the turbo lift following, and Hansen and she look very, very confused. In the transporter room, Scotty's there with a transporter technician. He's locked onto Kirk and Mendez, and he beams them aboard. Kirk has instructed them to store the shuttlecraft in the hangar deck. Hansen transfers command back to Kirk, which Kirk accepts, and he asks where Mr. Spock is. Mendez does not like the fact that he's only in his quarters after what he has done. And then the engines snap on, and Uhura calls from the bridge saying, "Captain, engine's coming on," and Kirk tries to reverse the orders, but he can't, as Hansen reveals that they have the computers running the ship by Mr. Spock's orders. Spock, meanwhile, is in his quarters, and he's watching all this on his desktop monitor as Kirk frantically tries to get the computer to disengage from helm on voice command, but the computer isn't having it, and replies, "Any attempt to cross-circuit the vessel's destination will result in destruction of this vessel before the vessel reaches planet Talos 4. And Kirk and Mendez just look at each other as Spock turns off the view screen, and boy, Spock is playing a wonderful game of chess here. What I really love about this episode so far is just how meticulously Spock has planned for this. It is wonderful, wonderful preparation by Spock, and he's executing his plan even more flawlessly than any of us knew the first time we were watching this, it has to be said. So we come to a captain's log. We're convening for a preliminary hearing in the briefing room, or is it the briefing room? Or it might be the differently dressed version of the rec room, actually. Preliminary hearing of Lieutenant Commander Spock to determine what the heck is going on here, to be honest. Spock is brought into the room. We have a yeoman there to act as a court recorder. We've got 2 security guards guarding him. We've got Kirk, and we have got Mendez as well. And Kirk gets the hearing underway, and he reminds Spock of his right to counsel. Spock quickly waives his right to not only counsel, but also to this hearing, and demands immediate court-martial, which Kirk says denied. A court-martial requires a trial board of at least 3 command officers, and since there's only 2 available, and Spock corrects Kirk, he says, "I believe you'll find there are 3 command rank officers available, yourself, Commodore Mendez, and Captain Christopher Pike." Kirk says, "Deny. Captain Pike is a complete invalid," but Mendez says, "We didn't have the heart to retire him, Jim. He's got you. Whatever he's up to here, he's planned it very well." And we cut immediately to the next scene, an updated log from Kirk saying General Court-Martial of Spock in effect, and we get everyone in full dress uniforms back in this room with a ding-ding bell to convene the court-martial. Now, this is another point that I wanted to make about this, the order of watching this episode. It is the only time in all of the original series that I find production order less preferable to broadcast order. I would never watch it in broadcast order, but it just seems a little weird that we get 2 episodes in a row at Starbase 11 and with a different commanding officer, and 2 episodes in a row with Starbase 11 in it that just happens to have a court-martial involved. Anyway, they get things underway, and in the room we've got the same people as before at the preliminary hearing, but we now have Captain Pike present, and we also have Scotty and McCoy there as well. Scotty is in normal standard uniform. McCoy is in full dress uniform. So Mendez begins questioning Spock and asking him, "Why have you got to get Pike to Talos 4? Spock says, "Well, are your comments part of the record?" And Mendez says, "Yes, it's on the record." And Spock thanks Mendez and requests that the monitor screen be engaged. And Mendez says, "Well, to what end?" And says, to answer the question you just asked. And Kirk realizes that Spock wants to present some very specific evidence, and he's basically maneuvered Mendes into asking that question so that he can direct this narrative, so to speak. And they agree, they humour Spock and realise that if they want to find out anything, they're going to have to go along with this. And Scotty engages the view screen with a very strange-looking control that looks like it could have been made out of a toaster. Probably is what it was made of, actually, to be honest. The screen engages, and we see on the screen the Enterprise. And Spock tells us that this is 13 years ago. The Enterprise and its commander, Captain Christopher Pike. And we see the bridge of the Enterprise on the screen as we saw it at the start of The Cage, the very first episode. And we get a close-up shot of Pike on the screen. We get a close-up shot of Pike as he is now. The differences between the two men, very, very plain for all to see. And Kirk says, screen off. And he walks over to Pike and says, Chris, was that really you on the screen there? And Pike beeps once for yes. And Kirk then demands to know, no vessel makes record tapes that detailed, that perfect. What were we watching? In the previous episode, we just saw in Court Martial tapes of that very nature with different angles, close-ups, where Kirk jettisoned the ion pod, allegedly, on the red alert. So, and Kirk's statement here is, no vessel makes, not made. I did think, could we explain this away by 13 years ago they didn't make record tapes of that nature, but maybe they do now. But his tense suggests that that is a continuity error to me. But Kirk demands to know, what were we watching? And Spock says, I cannot tell you at this time. They agree to continue anyway. And we go on with seeing the very early scenes of The Cage, where the Enterprise is on their way back home from a mission, and they are picking up a distress signal from what ultimately turns out to be Talos 4. And I'm not going to dwell too much on the scenes, on the flashbacks here, because we've already covered this story in The Cage. So I'm briefly just going to cover the fact that they decide to not initially pursue this distress signal. Pike goes to his quarters, tells them to stay on course. He has a little chat with Dr. Boyce about how he's feeling tired and needs a rest, and doesn't know if he wants to be in command of the Enterprise again. Ultimately, he's called back to the bridge, and the crash survivors are confirmed on Talos 4, so he sets course for Talos 4, and off they go. And the screen views out, and we're back in the briefing room with our trial participants. Mendes gets very upset here and wants to end the whole process, and Kirk disagrees. He says, I vote to continue, and Mendes says, and I vote we do not. Deadlock. And since I'm the senior officer here, and then Kirk reminds him here that it's not a deadlock, because there's one member of the trial board still to be heard from. And this is a line that I don't like here, without really revealing too much about Mendes at this point, because we won't get to that for a while. It seemed very, very not right for Mendes to forget that, but we'll move on for now. But Pike also votes to continue under these conditions, and we go back to the screen and we see Enterprise arriving at Talos 4. They decide they're going to beam down with a landing party of 6. They transport down. We get that famous scene where they find the blue flowers and Spock smiles at Pike, and they discover the alleged survivors' encampment and warmly greet them, and we meet the beautiful Susan Oliver playing Vina, and there's just something too perfect about all this. And we see the Talosians monitoring them from their underground dwellings, Pike on the screen, and their survival is just too perfect. And one of the older scientists says, let the girl explain this to you, and she takes Pike off to this rocky area where she promptly disappears, and Pike's attacked by the Talosians and dragged into a a hidden elevator, and down he goes. The crew, having seen the rest of the encampment disappear, follow and try and get through the door. They blast with their laser pistols, as they were called at the time, but no luck, they can't get through. As we cut back to the courtroom again, with Spock flipping his communicator open on the screen saying, "This is all some kind of trap. We've lost the captain." Signal comes in from the bridge. Kirk answers, and the message is for Commodore Mendez. The message states that Enterprise is receiving signals from planet Talos 4 against Starfleet General Order 7, and because of this, Captain Kirk is hereby relieved of command. Commodore Mendez is ordered to take command of the Enterprise and do whatever it takes to disable the vessel and stop it from reaching Talos 4. Spock gets up out of his seat here and goes over to Kirk and Mendez and says, "You must see the rest of this. It's very, very important to what happens to Captain Pike." And he pleads his case. But Mendez at this point is having none of it, and he orders Spock to return this ship to manual control. Dramatic music, one of the best pieces of music that I've heard so far in original Star Trek, and this episode is composed by Alexander Courage. Plays, and Spock says, "Sir, I respectfully decline." And Mendez says, "Well, you've earned the consequences." And he says, "This court is in recess. They're going to have a break here." As McCoy and Scotty take Pike out of the room, and we're left with just security and Kirk and Spock there. And Kirk challenges his first officer. He doesn't have a clue what's going on here, and the dramatic tension here between these two friends and comrades is just palpable. And Kirk says, "Do you know what you're doing? Have you lost your mind?" And I love the way Spock reacts here to the wonderful music that's playing in the background, and there's an air of desperation in his voice as he says, "Captain Jim, please don't stop me. Don't let him stop me. It's your career and Captain Pike's life." I love this performance from Nimoy. "You must see the rest of the transmission." Kirk realizes that right now there's nothing he can do, and he says, "Lock him up." And they take Spock out, and Kirk is left standing alone in the courtroom. And we get the message on screen for the first time, and the only time in the original series, "To be concluded next week." And wow, what an episode. This one is directed by Star Trek directing royalty at this point. Again, Mark Daniels. Will not go into him in detail because we've already done that in prior episodes. Kirk does a bit of a face palm here as the credits start to roll. He's really in a bad way here. He just doesn't, he's lost command of his ship. He doesn't know what his first officer's doing. His vessel is locked on course with Talos 4. And wow, what a mess. What an absolute mess. As the credits roll, we get special guest star Jeffrey Hunter, absolutely deserved. So nice to see Jeffrey Hunter getting credit here. Again, same for guest star Susan Oliver playing Vina. And we also get Malachi Throne, who we've already covered. He's playing Commodore Mendez here, but he's also playing the Keeper, ironically, as well. So he's on double duty there. We then get M. Lee Hudek in this cast list here, who is actually an alias for Majel Barrett. When Majel Barrett played the role of number 1 in The Cage, she used the name M. Lee Hudek, but she wasn't originally credited, I believe, in that pilot episode. So it's nice to see her getting credit here. Nurse Chapel does not appear in this or part 2. Peter Juria plays Tyler, who is standing next to Spock there. John Hoyt as Dr. Philip Boyce, and Adam Rourke as Chief Petty Officer Garrison. We then get McCoy, Scotty, and Uhura as usual. And we are featuring Sean Kenny here. Now, Sean Kenny is was at the time, very, very much a good lookalike for Jeffrey Hunter, who did not reprise the role of Pike for this episode. So it was played by Sean Kenny, who looks really very similar to Jeffrey Hunter. Hagen Beggs played Mr. Hansen, and Julie Parrish played Miss Piper. And the music for this episode was composed and conducted by Alexander Courage. So here we go. Here is the cast list for the episode. We can see our usual suspects, but we've got Jeff Hunter, Susan Oliver, Malachi Throne, Majel Barrett and if we could see that off screen, it would say Emily Hudek, Peter Juria, John Hoyt as Dr. Phil Boyce, and this is archive footage we got here, Adam Rourke, Dee Kelly, Jimmy Doohan, Nichelle Nichols, Hagen Beggs, and Sean Kenny, who, as he really looked out of all that makeup. And we've also got Julie Parrish as Ms. Piper, Bill Blackburn credited there as Hadley, Frank Da Vinci as Guard, and Tom Curtis as John Daly, uncredited. And I don't quite know. There was a Captain Daly, a John Daly in The Conscience of the King, but not in this episode. So that's a bit of a mystery to me, that one. Frank Da Vinci, I'm sure that's the guy who plays Lieutenant Brent, I meant to mention he was one of the security guards, I'm sure, who came to arrest Spock on the bridge. So here we have Hagen Beggs playing Mr. Hansen, as we take a bit more look into the extended cast. Born on 1937 in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and died in 2016. He was known for Titanic. I'm a bit of a Titanic buff myself, actually. The 1996, was that a mini-series? It might be the one starring Catherine Zeta-Jones. I'll have to check that out. Star Trek and The Changeling, 1980. We've got Sean Kenny there, the guy playing the disabled Pike here, born in 1944 and happily still with us. Julie Parrish, born 1940, died 2003. Actress and director, known for Mannix, Fireball 500, and Return to Peyton Place. We've then got Malachi Throne, 1928 to 2013. And as we move to the next screenshot that we have here, we can see all of the roles he played in Star Trek. He was Commodore Jose Mendez and the Keeper across 3 episodes. And he also played Senator Pardek in the 2-parter of Unification in Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, the last thing we have to do here is give this episode a score. I see that this gets an 8.2 on the Menagerie. For me, that is undermarked. I love this episode so much. I think it has so much in it. It has continuity problems here and there. One fact that was quite jarring for me is the fact that Mendez says that Chris Pike is about your age, which is clearly wrong. So for that reason, I'm going to settle on a very respectable score of 9. And there we are. And there you have it, my friends. The Menagerie Part 1 in the bag. We'll be back with Part 2 very, very soon. Our one and only 2-parter in Star Trek, the original series. I hope you enjoyed this little retrospective revisit to it with me today. Please give me a thumbs up, a big old like if you have enjoyed it. Please leave me some comments. Let me know if I missed anything or if you disagree with anything. Your comments and feedback have been wonderful to see on this channel so far. Please do me a massive favor too and help me to grow the channel by hitting the subscribe button. It's completely free to do so and it takes a second. Thank you so much for your support. It is massively appreciated. We'll end the episode there. We'll be back with Part 2 of the Menagerie very, very soon, where we'll continue this story of the Enterprise's inevitable journey to Talos 4 with Captain Pike on board and this court-martial. And I will see you next time. For now, I will say take care, stay safe, travel well, and above all else, live well and prosper.